Welcome to Sputnik, orbiting the world with me, George Galloway. Gayatri missed the bus, but she'll be along in a minute. The British government in the 1980s destroyed the miners' union. It was mere collateral damage, the destruction of the mining industry, which still had 1,000 years of coal under its feet. The mining communities, in their hundreds of thousands, then left on the post-industrial scrap heap, and of course the country itself, which thereafter was dependent on imported coal, oil under other people's countries, and for which we had to be ready to go to war, although foreign-owned nuclear power plants were briefly touted as an alternative. Now, 30 years later, the same British government is stealing the miners' pension funds. Peter Stavanovich is a rising star in British politics, and he's using his advocacy skills to speak up for the miners. And Leslie Moore is one of those retired miners whose pension fund has been nicked. Peter, Leslie, thanks for joining us. Peter, first of all, just tell us what this scandal is.
Thank you, George. I'm a very black and white sort of guy. I look at things as right and wrong. And when Les came to me with his story a week ago now, I literally rocketed from astonishment to anger to absolute outrage. What we're talking about here is a pension fund that our miners, national heroes, paid into over generations with their blood, with their sweat, many with their lives. All of these guys have got health-related conditions now. They pay this money into their pension fund. We come to 1994, and under John Major's government, he decides to privatise the coal industry, and the government says to the miners, we'll underwrite your pension, but we want a whopping extortionate 50% of any surplus, and our miners are railroaded into this agreement. Now, putting that into context, successive governments, through that agreement, have robbed, and robbed is the only way to look at this, £8 billion at least, 8 billion quid from our miners' pension fund. And we've recently seen this response to an FOI request from the Treasury saying the fund has not cost the government a single penny. So the government takes, successive governments take 8 billion quid from the miners. It doesn't cost them a penny. At the same time, over the same period, we see governments bailing out greedy bankers, negligent bankers, to the tune of £124 billion at least. It's an absolute scandal, an absolute outrage.
I had never heard of this until you started advocating for it. Which is one of the reasons why I wanted you on the show. Yeah. Why has this been ignored?
I've got to tell you, when they came to me with their story, and I read this, I personally felt this sense of shame because, firstly, how could we do this to national heroes that kept our homes, our hospitals, our schools warm, that kept the wheels of our industry turning, working in the most incomprehensibly dangerous conditions? I felt personally ashamed. I knew nothing about this. And then I go to research it. There's very little out there. And I had to come to the conclusion that mainstream media has deliberately kept this story away from the public. I threw down the gauntlet after I put out those two films to mainstream media, and I said, who has the to report this absolute travesty of justice? Two people contact me. One, Steve Topple at the Canary, who we both admire immensely, and your producer, Tim Allen. And here we are. And that says something about mainstream media and where to go for the truth.
But from little acorns, great oaks can grow.
Do you know something? Something that really struck me about the two films that I put out was this. Over the last week, I've been inundated with messages from miners all over the country that have said, Peter, thank you for putting those films out. We felt that the British people had abandoned us, the miners. That's not true, because when you look at the literally hundreds of comments on the films that I've put out, there's this outpouring of love, affection, respect and admiration for our miners, because the British people know what our miners did for us.
Leslie, I'm an honorary member of the National Union of Mine Workers since 1982.
Mardy Lodge.
Yes, South Wales area, Mardy Lodge. Their pain means a lot to me. There are not many days that go by when I don't remember the great battles that I stood with you on. This is a very considerable insult added to the gigantic injury the mining communities have already suffered, isn't it?
It's a tremendous, an absolutely tremendous outrage. There's no other way of saying it apart from it being an outrage. No other section of society would have been treated like this.
No.
It is a punishment. And what happened is the establishment has decided to punish the miners all the way to the graves. And they're doing it financially through our pension scheme. They tried it earlier, as you will probably know, through the Ridley Commission.
Yeah.
And then once the pits have gone and privatising, they still wanted to punish us. They wanted us to punish us for daring to stand up and fight for our jobs and communities. That's what they've done, and they're doing it through our pension scheme.
As you
and
say,
they're doing it under everybody's
grave.
noses.
All the way to the grave.
That's right.
£8 billion.
Well,
imagine
that's
what
an estimate.
that could have done in the mining communities, many of which are basically heaps now of desolated people.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to physically make the analogy too strong, but the situation that's been left in the mining communities is now absolutely desperate. Mass unemployment, social problems, drug and alcohol abuse, hopelessness. £8 billion could have transformed that.
Yeah, that's only a conservative figure, 8 billion. It is not the actual full figure, because I believe we're actually, if we had an actuary look at it, I think we'll be looking at 12 billion.
I think it could be as high as 20 billion. Let's remember, we're talking about successive governments here. I think Steve Topple reported yesterday that in 2003, Tony Blair's government milked this pension for 400 million quid at a point when stocks and shares had taken a dive. They almost bankrupted the miners' pension fund. We're talking about a Blairite government here doing just that.
Well, that doesn't
surprise
me.
us, no.
Of course. But how did the union agree, perhaps they had no choice, agree to this ploy by which they took 50% of any surplus?
They didn't actually agree to it. What happened was, after the strike of '95, there was 5 elected trustees and 5 appointed trustees. The 5 elected trustees were all NUM. The government then removed an NUM trustee, saying that the UDM, because of the numbers of its members...
This was the breakaway scab union that worked to break the strike.
I'm going to correct you a little bit there. I don't call it a union. I don't give it that credibility. It's a government agency, George. What happened was, David Hart came, Margaret Thatcher's advisor. He provided the funding, he provided the expertise, he was the designer of the breakaway, he was the man who educated them what to do. So seeing as it's government agency, with Margaret Thatcher's advisor, and private money, it's their agent. They imposed a government agent onto the board, which was Neil Greatex, which has been in papers not long back for. He was stealing money from an old folks' home. He provided the vote to give the government access to our pension scheme.
50% of your surplus.
Yes.
You know,
he
George,
was the man who did it.
Now that this issue is in the public domain, there are serious questions that need to be asked about how this agreement came into being. I've only been involved a week, and from what I can see, trying to put the pieces together, we've got the government of the day, John Major's government, being a party to the agreement. We've got British Coal, but at that point in time, we're still part of the nationalised industry. So we've got the government and British Coal, one and the same.
Same thing.
And then we've got a handful of trustees of the pension fund. Now, how on earth did a handful of trustees to this pension fund get involved in this deal? Was there no actuary report to tell them what...
And one of those, you're a legal man, these trustees had a fiduciary duty to the members whose funds they were.
And, you know, one would imagine that the trustees of a pension fund would have access to a whole building full of actuaries chomping out figures who would be saying, hang on a moment, if we do this deal, it's unlikely to cost the government anything because sadly miners have a short life expectancy, but they'll be milking us for billions of pounds forever. It's extraordinary.
Yeah, go on, Les, yeah.
There actually was an actuary's report. Wilson and Wyatt was an in-house actuary service for the government. What their report suggested a sharing of 15% for the government and 85% for the NUM. What happened was they totally ignored it.
Was that report shared with the trustees of the fund?
Well, I don't know about that.
So the government's own in-house actuary recommended the government get 15% of any surplus in your pension fund, but they actually took 50.
Yeah.
50.
The information is in the public domain. It's not something I've just conjured up. It is there for everybody to see. Everybody in this country can Google it.
That makes me even more outraged, George, because let's put this into context.
You're on here.
There is an actuary report, then, you believe, obtained by the government, recommending an 85-15% split, which in itself is outrageous. Was that report shared with the trustees of the pension fund? If it was, why was this information not disseminated to the miners? And if it wasn't shared with the trustees, why the hell didn't the trustees get their own actuary report? You know, it's an absolute outrage. There needs to be a public inquiry, George, into how this disgraceful agreement came into being.
And I think that's a demand that we can win.
Yeah, I agree.
It's one thing that the miners' union was destroyed, that the mining industry was destroyed, that the community was destroyed. But as Leslie put it in very, very eloquent terms there, they are determined to hunt and punish the miners all the way to the grave. As you put it, they've got a short life expectancy. What happens next? What's your next stage?
There is going to be a rally in Liverpool, which Les has arranged for the 27th of September.
Yeah, you will probably be at the conference, will you, George?
No, but I can be at your rally. Unfortunately, I'm not yet welcome in the Labour Party.
It would be incredible if you could be there. But just to put this into context, I suggested to Les, why don't you make your rally a march? And he said, we can't do that because so many of the surviving members are now invalids. Their knees are knackered. They've got chronic chest conditions because of the coal dust they inhale. They can't march.
I've been down many coal mines, and you correctly described it earlier. These men are heroes.
National heroes.
And they've been robbed. Gentlemen, thanks for coming on board this Sputnik.